Hi, everyone. So we are the change makers, and we will all individually discuss our concept maps for our capstone projects. So let's get started. My name is Rachel Phillips, and I will present my capstone overview on expanding Veterans Health Administration or VHA services to unfavorably discharged veterans. Just a little bit of background. When service members exit the military, they're given one of many discharge types, and the types of discharge received has a large impact on the types of veterans benefits that one can qualify for upon discharge. And unfavorable discharges referred to in this capstone particularly are veterans with other than honorable discharges, bad conduct discharges, and dishonorable discharges. Generally, veterans who received these discharges displayed a certain level of misconduct while in service, incongruent with the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And so these discharges are considered unfavorable because they are discharges that limit or eliminate altogether the Veterans Health Administration benefits that one can receive upon re-entering into the civilian world. VHA services are comprehensive and cover a wide range of needed resources, including physical and mental health care, substance use services, housing and homelessness services, vocational services, disability benefits, and more. And research highlights how service members exposed to combat experiences have higher levels of PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, and other mental health issues that increase the risk of violating the Uniform Code of Military Justice and then being given unfavorable discharges. And so unfavorably discharged veterans also experience mental health issues, physical health issues, homelessness, and vocational difficulties to a greater extent than favorably discharged veterans. And so the types and degree of VHA services they qualify for are limited to address these needs. So to start out, first, my systematic literature review will be completed first to highlight the connection between unfavorable discharges and the quality of life that these veterans can achieve. Particularly, the literature review will answer the question of what are the impacts of unfavorable discharges on veterans, specifically the social, economic, and health impacts of unfavorable discharges. The identification of these areas will inform the VHA needs of this population to be addressed in the conceptual paper, which is next. The conceptual paper will illustrate current views of this population and their disqualification of services and propose alternative ways to view this social problem through the lens of veteran critical theory and the biopsychosocial perspective. Essentially, the biopsychosocial perspective is a systems approach. Currently, the military community outcasts veterans with unfavorable discharges, and the current barring of unfavorable discharges from receiving VHA services is similar to the worthy and unworthy poor dynamic during the Elizabethan era. And veterans in this subpopulation are given negative discharges because of maladaptive behaviors while in service and are then labeled as unworthy of receiving important services to mitigate these presenting problems. Excuse me. Although the system in place for the qualification of resources appears logical in nature, it completely disregards how issues from combat experiences increase the likelihood of unfavorable discharges. And so veteran critical theory and the biopsychosocial perspective rooted in systems theory are alternative ways to view this proposed issue and can be joined together to argue for the expansion of services. Veteran critical theory is essentially critical theory in the context of the veteran population, and critical theory itself works to dismantle oppression of certain groups of people and deconstruct the power imbalances between groups of people to make systems more equitable. In employing a veteran critical theorist lens, the discharge requirements for qualifying for mental health care would be seen as flawed and oppressive in nature, and increases the vulnerability and perpetuation of suffering that unfavorable veterans experience and thus needs reforming. The biopsychosocial perspective is more of the micro perspective of this social issue and the clinical backing of expanding services to this population. It's holistic in nature, and it contends that a person's overall health is the culmination of the interaction between their biological, psychological, and social domains. And if one area suffers, the entire person essentially suffers. So veterans with unfavorable discharges are not provided the wealth of VHA services to address mental health issues, substance use, homelessness, and other areas inhibiting holistic health. So this model provides justification for the need for wraparound services to meet this population's needs. So now we move on to the application paper, which aims to basically implement a solution rooted in these combined theories previously talked about. To expand service to the unfavorably discharged veteran population, we really must reform the eligibility requirements or the policy for qualifying for services. We can then discuss the idea of veteran-centered care, which is rooted in the biopsychosocial perspective, which would allow this population to qualify for the physical and mental health care, substance use service, vocational service, and housing and homelessness resources, and vocational assistance. So the overarching goal of this capstone is to justify the need to expand VHA services to unfavorably discharged veterans, and then propose a solution such as the policy reform and then veteran-centered care to enhance veteran prosperity. And doing so would advance the clinical social work practice that is available to this population, because social workers challenge social injustice and advocate for change for oppressed and marginalized populations to increase autonomy and opportunity in mitigating presenting problems. So this proposed capstone would advance the profession in upholding the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics and increase the quality of life that all veterans can receive regardless of discharge. Thank you for listening, and now I will turn it over to Erica.
Right. There we go. Does it look okay? Hello, my name's Erica Walker, and I'll be going over my capstone product proposal concept map. And in this concept map, I really wanted to outline first the systematic lit review, which I'll be doing first, and the problem and proposed solution. So the problem I'm looking at is the incarceration of pregnant people with substance use disorder. And just to give a little background, the incarceration of women has increased by over 500% since the 1980s. So with the increased incarceration of women, there's also increase of women who are pregnant and incarcerated. And currently, there are no federal policies or standards for the type of care that women should receive. And they're often separated from their babies. There's even cases, and in many states, they're still being shackled and cuffed during active childbirth and labor. So really wanted to take a closer look at this problem and also propose a solution of recovery housing as an alternative to incarceration. There's currently a very successful recovery housing model in Kentucky that there are plans already. The actual facility is being developed to use that base model, the Recovery Kentucky model, to develop a pregnant and parenting women's center. So I'm hoping that this capstone product will help them with some key considerations they should look at to make this a successful model and be adapted to fit pregnant and parenting women. So the research question I'm asking is recovery housing an effective alternative to incarceration? And then I'll go over my research methods, my search strategies, keywords, and some of those, just to give you a rundown of some of those, that the articles will need to be under 10 years old. I'll be using keywords including pregnancy and incarceration, pregnancy, substance use and incarceration, and substance use and recovery housing, because I really want to cover not only in the systematic lit review, I want to cover the problem, what's currently being done for pregnant women, as well as how recovery housing has been used and the effectiveness of recovery housing. And then I'll provide an overview of the results that I find, strengths, limitations, and relevant factors. And then moving over to the conceptual paper, I'll really be looking at and providing a theoretical basis for both the problem and the solution. So how did we get here? Why are we incarcerating so many people, and especially women currently? And so one of the theories that I'm looking at for that is incapacitation theory. And that theory really says that we incarcerate people as a deterrent. We think that if we incarcerate them, they won't be committing more crimes. But we know from the increase in incarceration and recidivism over the years, that's not true. So we really want to pick that apart and look at that. We're also going to be looking at the separation of a baby and the parent after childbirth and attachment theory. And then on the solution side, I really want to focus on recovery housing and why it's so beneficial. With the Recovery Kentucky model that we're going to be using as a case study, they've got over a decade of longitudinal data behind them and some really amazing outcomes and return on investment in this model. So we're going to be looking at why is it effective? What's special about it? So social learning theory will be explored, social distance theory, because it has a heavy base in the peer-led social model. So social distance theory says that people identify with people who have experiences similar to them. So because it's a peer-led model, it's people with lived experience helping one another through the recovery journey. And then I also plan to touch on the social determinants of health. We know that clinical care alone is only about 10% of someone's overall quality in health or their overall health care. So the social and economic factors are really important, and that's something that recovery housing does very well. And I plan to summarize that and be able to set it up for the practice or application paper, where we're really going to be doing an overview of the intervention we're using here, which is the base Recovery Kentucky model. And again, that's an existing evidence-based recovery housing model. And we're really going to look at, though, that model is designed, there's women's programs and men's programs across the state of Kentucky already, but it's not been used before for the pregnant and parenting population. So the new program that's being developed in Kentucky will serve pregnant women and their babies. So they will be able to keep their baby there for a certain length of time. So I really want to, again, go over and explore key considerations. I'm going to be interviewing other recovery houses who serve pregnant and parenting women and researching and looking at what works, what doesn't work for this population, and then making some really meaningful program adaptation suggestions for this new model that's being developed. So we'll be looking at everything from referral and intake and key considerations they should think of. And for example, with referral, currently, these women usually stay within a local county jail or a state-run prison facility. They aren't referred anywhere. So that'll be one part of the solution, is really looking at how they can be flagged in the system and be referred to a program like this. Then we'll also be looking at the intake. What do they need to know about these women? What makes them applicable for a program like this? And then we'll be moving on into the educational phase, or the really heavy program phase. So what should they be offering to these women? Things such as parenting classes, life skills development, things like that. So we'll be looking at what's important for the program for this population. And then finally, we'll move on to the exit and considerations for them to transition successfully out of the program and make sure they're set up for success. And I'll also be touching on the evaluation piece throughout this process. So I'll be touching on what the intake might look like for the referral process, what the intake might look like for the educational phase, and the exit and transition out. And that's all I have to cover. So I will hand it over to the next team member.
Hi, I'm Megan O'Brien, and I am going to be presenting my conceptual map for my capstone. It's going to be exploring the intersectionality of stigmatization, the internalization of symptoms, and treatment effectiveness among victims of childhood sexual abuse. So a little background: childhood sexual abuse is defined as the involvement of a child in a sexual activity that violates the law. Rates of childhood sexual abuse are vastly underreported, but it's believed that nearly 1 in 4 females and 1 in 13 males are victims of childhood sexual abuse. Social stigma surrounding this abuse often leaves the victims with feelings of stigmatization and the need to internalize negative symptoms. So my systematic literature review is going to be exploring the question of how does stigmatization and internalization of symptoms affect treatment outcomes. It's known that the effects of stigmatization can be very impactful on the well-being and relationships of these victims. And those who have experienced higher severity and longer lasting abuse have a higher level of stigmatization. It can be related back to the secretive context of the abuse, the treatment of the victim by the perpetrator, and especially the social stigma and legal ramifications regarding the relationship. It's also going to be looking at the effects of internalization of symptoms and the outcome of various treatment modalities. We're going to specifically be looking at trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and compassion therapies, and how those all intersect with each other. The results will show that there are adverse effects of stigmatization and internalization of symptoms on treatment outcomes. This will lead to the conceptual paper, which is going to be looking at the problem through the social learning theory and trauma theory lenses. The social learning theory promotes the idea that people learn from those around them. Their parents, peers, the media, and education influence their beliefs and biases. So looking at childhood sexual abuse, the theory really encompasses the fact that people are learning the stigma from those that are surrounding them. Trauma theory is working to understand the implications of a traumatic event on a person. It helps to understand the effects that the trauma has on that person and explains how the person processes, perceives, and progresses after a traumatic event. So looking through the framework of both of these theories, a solution can be reached to decrease stigmatization in order to increase the treatment effectiveness for childhood sexual abuse victims. By promoting a safe and supportive relationship, we can reduce the social stigma, but also increase the ability for a supportive relationship to disclose the trauma. So the practice application paper is going to be working on development of an educational program as an anti-stigma campaign. It will address the social stigma through this educational program and will be designed to be disseminated through social media, in schools, advocacy centers, and other various agencies who are involved in working with these victims. By using education as a tool, it'll work to reduce negative stereotypes and also provide the factual information. It is known that studies have shown that this technique, while reducing social stigma, is also effective at reducing internalized stigma and increasing self-esteem in these populations that have shown great success when used in conjunction of cognitive behavioral therapies. Its implications for clinical social work practice are going to be in that it increases the positive prognosis for victims. By reducing the stigmatization, it will allow for more positive help, and it will, in addition, it will allow for the opportunity for more victims to seek treatment in a clinical setting after promoting safe relationships for disclosure. And thank you. And now I'll be turning it over to the next group member.
Okay, this is Colleen Slusher, and I am doing my capstone on forensic care. So the overarching issue is the lack of best practices in forensic inpatient settings. This basically means there's no agreed upon framework for which to provide care across forensic facilities. So forensic psychiatric care is defined as individuals who are involved in the criminal justice system who have significant behavioral health issues that result in the need for an evaluation for competency to stand trial, to face their charges, or restoration to competency, or those patients who are civilly committed to a hospital once their case is adjudicated and competent, but they have violent felony charges and require court commitments to psychiatric hospitals for long periods of time. In the fiscal year of 2023, 64% nationally of all psychiatric beds are now used for forensic patients instead of acute psychiatric care patients. These populations that fall under forensic care are part of a larger system of behavioral health care for people who have serious mental illness and intellectual and developmental disabilities. So identifying and implementing best practices helps the hospitals, the forensic care hospitals, the patients, the courts, and the communities. From the systematic literature review, I will look at best practice materials or anything that seems evidence-informed in forensic care. And we'll include assessment tools, fidelity, quality assurance, measurements of outcomes, and all related assessments. The initial review that I did focused on person-centered care as a best practice in standard healthcare, and it identified theoretical frameworks from both person-centered care principles and forensics as inclusive of self-determination theory and systems theory. So self-determination theory focuses on the ability for patients to have autonomy, collaborative decision-making, and relationship building with their providers. And evidence shows in standard healthcare that those lead to positive outcomes. And so that's why that's the focus for this forensic care as well. So my conceptual paper will focus on these theoretical underpinnings in addition to recovery-oriented principles as well, because the literature is clear that person-centered care leads to improved outcomes in standard healthcare, such as treatment adherence, medication compliance, maintenance of reduced symptoms, and compliance with appointments, follow-up appointments, and improved relationships with providers. It seems only natural that a solution for forensics would also include person-centered care principles. So of course, the question is how. Forensic hospitals use interdisciplinary teams where everyone has a different role and a different perspective on what forensic care should look like. And this is a deeply stigmatized population as well. And so the interdisciplinary teams have different perspectives on what care should look like. So for the application element of this capstone project, it will be to create a curriculum or a conceptual framework for universal applicability. So meaning that across all forensic facilities nationally, as well as all disciplines within the facility, how to implement person-centered care principles. So this hopefully will lead to some improved outcomes that are specific to forensic care, such as treatment adherence, medication compliance, decreased recidivism, and rehospitalization, while targeting very specific social determinants of health. This will, in turn, improve the larger system of care for behavioral health by improving quality standards. Forensic care has often seen itself as operating in a silo, separate from acute psychiatric hospital care, but really it's the same patients going in and out of the same systems. From a social work perspective, this kind of work aligns with identifying standards in healthcare, as well as practice, evaluation, and quality improvement. And from a leadership lens, this type of work focuses on quality improvement, policy development, and accountability, macro level considerations, including legislative changes where needed, national practices for evidence-informed practices, and advocacy for self-determination at all levels of practice. So again, the problem is best practices are needed in forensic care. The concept is the connection between person-centered care and self-determination for improved outcomes, and the application is the development of training curriculum as a conceptual framework for universal applicability in and across forensic psychiatric care. And with that, I will turn it over to Courtney.
That looks great, Courtney. You can unmute whenever you're ready.
Goodness, I thought I was talking. Here we go. Okay, hello, my name is Courtney Farrell, and I am a licensed independent social worker from the state of Ohio. And I am currently practicing as a mental health and substance use treatment provider for adolescents at an intensive level in community settings. This topic came about due to the daily interactions that I have with my clients and the barriers that they face in society, but also within the mental health community. This capstone project is important to me because I am able to see how clients are being seen at inappropriate levels of care due to a lack of providers that are able to provide substance use treatment for adolescents. Additionally, there is a true stigma and lack of education among society and the mental health community. For example, my clients are often turned away from inpatient care because substance use is not considered an acute behavioral concern, even if there is a safety concern with it. Unfortunately, I have also seen psychiatrists that are not comfortable prescribing medications if clients are using substances. Additionally, residential treatment centers are often not an option if a client is using substances and they will need to be detoxed. However, there is no adolescent detox centers in the state of Ohio. These reactions are due to a lack of education and continued stigma around substance use. How I see these interactions and experiences affect my clients and restrict their access and has driven the development of my capstone project. So this capstone product proposal will overview the 3 articles: the systematic literature review, the conceptual paper, and the practice application paper. The problem can be identified in the systematic literature review as an increase in substance use treatment due to an inadequate number of treatment services. So within the systematic literature review, the problem will be addressed as well as researching potential solutions. So the proposed solution being researched is the effectiveness of a comprehensive wraparound treatment model. The primary research question being, does comprehensive care that includes wraparound services mitigate existing treatment gaps, as well as understanding factors that contribute to a current lack of treatment options? The literature review will address the search process, results, and data that supports the proposed solution, as well as factors that are currently contributing to the issue. Finally, the systematic literature review will lead us to the conceptual paper and discuss next steps. The conceptual paper will address the central problem of lack of treatment options for adolescent substance use, how it became an issue, and the current and new theories surrounding this concern. The portion regarding for the concern for substance use will address current practices, interventions, and their effectiveness, as well as the standard way of operating under the current theories. Additionally, new theories will be introduced, including anti-ageism and systems theories. Anti-ageism because there are significantly more resources for adult treatment of substance use than there are for adolescents. And systems theory in order to address all areas of the client's life and create comprehensive care and react in a more proactive way in order to address concerns rather than reactive. These theories will then be utilized to develop a proposed solution, which is the result of the conceptual paper. The final result of the conceptual paper is to identify the proposed solution based on the new theories. The practice application paper will then lead us to how the solution will be implemented. Current resources and resources that need to be developed will be looked at. For example, if there are any other countries that are currently using a comprehensive wraparound treatment models or other states, we will look at that, as well as the effectiveness of current resources and how those can be utilized as well. Additionally, the connection to social work will be explored. This concern is applicable to clinical social work. However, the impact of this concern spreads to all areas of social work, including micro, meso, and macro. Finally, the proposed solution will be used in a case example to discuss why the treatment center is the most effective option based on research discussed in the systematic literature review. The result of this paper is to implement the solution proposed in the conceptual paper and research as a result of the concern in the systematic literature review. As you can see through the conceptual map, there's a golden thread that runs throughout these 3 articles. We can see how the systematic literature review relates to the conceptual paper and the practice application paper. And we can see how the original research question in the systematic literature review raises the concern for adolescent substance use and the lack of appropriate resources, as well as leads us to the proposed solution of a comprehensive wraparound treatment model in order to address all concerns. Additionally, down here at the bottom, we see that the proposed next steps of the systematic literature review then progresses to the proposed solution, which then leads us to ask the question, how will we implement this? Thank you so much for watching the Changemakers group presentation of the capstone product proposal and conceptual maps. Thank you.